Behnam Ben Taleblu, a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense Democracies. Welcome back again to the program. As we watch this video of these 5 Americans get off the plane in Doha this morning, and they're smiling, they're hugging people on the ground. What is the significance of this swap as you see it, and why might it be problematic as people watch?
Well, it's certainly significant from a perspective of reuniting loved ones and family members. As you had mentioned previously, there are some of these dual nationals who are hostage in Iran for as long as 8 years. They're held in very poor conditions. Evin prison, notorious prison in Iran, where there have been hostages, political prisoners, and all sorts of other unjustly detained persons held, is essentially infamous for its maltreatment of these individuals. So any time you get to bring people out of there and bring them home, that's a positive. However, there is a darker side to this story, which is the payment, which is in effect, in my view, a ransom payment to the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The fact that Iran continues to hold 3 U.S. nationals as defined by the Levinson Act, including one who was not just hostage, but abducted and kidnapped abroad and brought back to Iran as a hostage, raises likely the chance that the Islamic Republic is going to also try to get some kind of financial ransom payment in place to give them up, and means that the regime is going to continue taking other foreign citizens and dual nationals hostage.
How much influence does Iran have on a country like Russia right now on the global stage?
It just depends a great deal on what you mean by influence. For example, Iran is tightening military ties. It's long been seen as a lowly junior partner to Russia, as both states seek to contest the U.S. and the liberal world order that American power underwrites. Russia has long looked to Iran as to be something of a spoiler to keep America distracted in the Middle East. But what you see now with this tightening political relationship, economic relationship, military relationship, is that both Russia and China see greater value in Iran under the Islamic Republic, and they see greater value in using it as more than just a spoiler. Again, China gets cheap oil from Iran. Russia is now getting drones from Iran for use in Ukraine. This allows Russia to stay in the fight longer against the Ukrainians, allows him to continue his war of imperial aggression against the Ukrainians, and keep his longer-range precision strike stuff in storage, or to selectively use them, and those would be cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. Not to mention, of course, that Iran has been subject to many different kinds of economic sanctions over the past 4 decades. Sanctions busting is essentially an art form by the Islamic Republic, and now with many of these extraterritorial and economic and coercive punitive measures being applied to Putin may be looking to Iran to help learn something from the master of sanctions busting. So Iran is looking to move from junior partner to middle partner with Russia.
That's interesting. Talk about Qatar's role in all of this, mediating, or at least assisting in mediating this deal.
There's been lots of countries who have auditioned for the role of mediator between U.S. and Iran. Some of them have auditioned structurally and have sought to keep that position of establishing a back channel or a dialogue between Iran. If you remember, Oman played a critical role in setting up this channel. Oman played a critical role in setting up the channel for what would become the JCPOA. Oman played a critical role in helping getting other American hikers who were detained in Iran out. The regional countries have always tried to play some sort of role. The reason there is cause for concern here potentially with Qatar is that Qatar is somewhat of a permissive jurisdiction when it comes to terror finance. Qatar, as you know, sometimes plays footsie with some of these terrorist organizations. And, it's essentially where the Taliban moved their political headquarters. It's where Hamas had moved to as well. And in the aftermath of the GCC rift, the Gulf Cooperation Council rift between Saudi Arabia and Qatar after 2015 to 2017, now it looks like Qatar is trying to punch above and get some kind of diplomatic gravitas here with playing that role of mediator. So certainly it's one to expect, it's one to look at with a little bit of caution.
One final question for you is prisoner treatment. I mean, we know how Iran has been accused of treating its own while detained, but how are Americans being detained in Iran being treated? Where are they being held? What more do we know about what the experience has been like for several of these men over the last few years?
It's been a very harrowing experience. One of these individuals, for instance, Siamak Namazi, has talked at great length and, in fact, had been able to share stories. And I think he even recently, maybe several months ago, did a CNN interview indirectly with Christian Amanpour, talking about his time in Evin prison, talking about the conditions there, talking about the imperatives of release. No one is against that. What many people are worried about is, as great as it is to have some of these individuals come out, that the manner in which they were secured means that more dual nationals, more foreign citizens would be subject to those same deplorable conditions. You've had individuals come out and write books about their experience, regardless of their origin. Dr. Kylie Moore-Gilbert, an Australian academic who was held in Iran's Evin prison. Jason Rezaian, Washington Post columnist, Washington Post reporter, has also written a book about his experience. Shuye Wang, the Princeton PhD candidate, has written a book about his experience. Not written a book, has written articles about his experience. So, unfortunately, there is a lot to do to connect the dots there about the harrowing tales of people who have seen these prisons and these conditions. And I expect we'd hear more from these individuals when they return.
Stay on the line for me, if you will. I want to welcome in retired Major General William Enyart now to talk more about what we're seeing and the implications of this prisoner exchange. General Enyart, as always, thank you for your time. As I'm talking with Behnam Ben Taleblu here about the precedent this sets, he believes it is problematic. What's your read?
Well, I have to agree that it's a bit problematic, but on the other hand, you have to understand that when you're negotiating with the devil, you're negotiating with the devil, and the other folks on the other side of the negotiation table have a voice too. We can't dictate to this. And, the folks who are claiming that we've given Iran money, we haven't given Iran any money. That's Iranian money that we blocked and essentially seized and have been holding, in the Iranian view, we've been holding their funds hostage. So to call it a giveaway is simply not accurate.
However, there are no restrictions on how the money that had been sanctioned will be used. They say it can only be used for humanitarian aid, food, and medicine. But who's to say that Iran doesn't turn around and supply Russia with more weapons?
Well, the Iranians don't have the money. The money's being held in a third party, by a third party. So, it remains to be seen how those funds will be released. But certainly, if they're just completely released, that would impact any future negotiations with the Iranians, and would certainly destroy any credibility with Qatar as a third party to hold these funds. So the only folks who are claiming that the Iranians have full sway to spend this money are hardline Iranian clerics who have their own political agenda to put out.
And how significant is this swap this week, a year after Mahsa Amini was killed in Iranian custody, and also the fact that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky will be in the U.S. to talk about and to persuade Congress to give more money to his soldiers to fight and fend off Russia?
Well, I don't know that this could really be tied into the Ukrainian situation and President Zelensky visiting the United Nations and speaking to the U.S. Congress. Those are really separate issues, although, of course, the Iranians have been busy selling drones and other military equipment to the Russians. The fact that this occurs approximately a year after that poor young woman's death, evidently at the hands of Iranian security forces, certainly seems to be more than perhaps just coincidence.
I want to bring in Behnam Ben Taleblu one more time. What do we know about the Iranian prisoners and what they were convicted of? Can you walk us through the 5 that will be released from U.S. custody?
Sure. Is there any opportunity to provide a quick footnote to what the guest had mentioned about the nature of the money first?
Of course.
I would just respectfully disagree in a few areas. Yes, indeed, it is seen as Iran's money, as in these are oil revenues that the Islamic Republic had tried to earn through, permitted oil transactions. But let's not forget why the freeze, why the block was put on, quote unquote, Iran's money to begin with. This was not invented by the Trump administration. This was resurrected by the Trump administration because these were lockup provisions created through acts of Congress, signed into law year after year by the Obama administration, actually. The Obama administration, which got the JCPOA in 2015. And ultimately, the Obama administration did that because of Iran's continued support for terrorism and the linkage between oil revenues and the other destabilizing things the Islamic Republic does, which at that time included, of course, nuclear escalation. So let's not forget this money was restricted for a reason, and that the U.S. has often had, from a national security perspective, a problem with how Iran spends, quote unquote, its own money. So that's one. Two is, of course, money is fungible. Even in the best case scenario where you would have the most controls and you take the administration talking points beyond face value and you agree 100% with what people like Kirby are saying about this not going to Iran directly, money is still fungible. In the instance where Iran would want to spend X billion or X million on something humanitarian from abroad, with the provision of this money or the accessibility of this money or the making of this money more accessible to the regime, it frees up other revenues to do things that we know the Islamic Republic has often done. In the 4-decade history, you've often seen them preference guns over butter. So this is why the release of any kind of funds to these individuals and these kind of states is problematic. And I understand the geopolitical imperatives of diplomacy and negotiation, but there's a time and place for everything. And the reason the Islamic Republic continues to take hostages is because of the inherent asymmetry in the hostage-taking, which will bring us to your question about the Iranian prisoners here in the U.S. There are at least 5 individuals who have been convicted. Some were serving sentences. Many, if not all of them, were tied to some kind of sanctions violation or export control charge. One of them, I believe, was there was a potential FARA or lobbying issue there as well. I believe that was an individual in Boston by the name of Afra Siabi. But of the 5 people that were supposed to be sent back, or on the American side where there were Iranian criminals here supposed to be sent back, 2 will be going back, 3 will be remaining due to their own immigration status here in the United States of America. That's the latest that Iranian and Western media have been reporting about this. And another reason about to mention the asymmetry is these are individuals who have violated U.S. laws. The people coming home via Qatar from Iran today are innocent dual nationals who have not only not violated Iranian laws, they are charged on trumped-up versions of Iranian laws, and they are hostages. These are criminals leaving America. Those are hostages coming back from Iran. So talk about dictating terms.
Yeah, important distinction. I want to bring back in General Enyart now. First of all, if you'd like to respond to my other guest comments on the money exchanging hands, but also U.S.-Iranian relations moving forward, how you think this will impact them.
Well, I think we're just going to have to agree to disagree as to the nature of those funds. Those funds are Iranian funds that we have blocked the use of for many years. And he makes a sophisticated argument, but I have to disagree with that, the basic premise of his argument. In terms of ongoing relations, the ongoing relationship with Iran is going to continue to be fraught with difficulties. We're simply, as long as the current leadership is in charge in Iran, we're not going to see any basic change there. And it's going to take a great deal of basic social change in that country in order for us to see any improvement in the relationships between the U.S. and Iran.
Retired Major General William Enyart and Behnam Ben Taleblu, to you both, thank you.